Assalamu alaikum. Today we're going to talk about Russian formalism, which happens to be a very important theory alongside neo-criticism. Well, just like neo-criticism, Russian formalism also focuses on the text and the form, just like the name formalism suggests. Even before Russian Revolution, there were certain groups that were active in terms of exploring the form of a literary text. Well, the thing is that before Russian formalism, there were certain schools of thought that were being followed, and people were not really happy with that school of thought. People were looking at things from a materialistic point of view. So that is something people got tired of, and they needed a new method to evaluate literature. And that method is Russian formalism, in which you have to stick to the form, and form happens to be very important for the Russian formalists. The irony is that some of the Russian formalists broke away from the Russian formalists and joined new critics later on. Alright, but Russian formalism is something that came slightly before new criticism, and it may be something that could have inspired the new critics as well. So, talking about Russian formalism, and of course I would be using my trustworthy book so that I could highlight on the key elements pertaining to this particular theory. Alright. So the Russian formalists believe that human emotions, ideas and reality does not possess any literary significance. So something that really carries significance is the form itself. Alright. Emotions, reality, feelings, they keep changing all the time, but it's the structure that is everlasting, and this is what the Russian formalists believe. So before the Russian Revolution, there was this Moscow linguistic circle that was actually concerned about the literary form of a text, and there were some renowned figures who actually founded a particular society, which is OPOJAZ, which stands for the Society for the Study of Poetic Language. And the ones who actually initiated this particular thing founded the Prague Linguistic Circle as well. And the leader of this particular movement happens to be Roman Jakobson, and not only Jakobson, but there were a bunch of other people as well. There was Peter Boga-Tyrev, there was Shilkowsky, there was Yuri Tynyanov, there was Boris Eichenbaum, and a host of other people who had a lot of contribution when it comes to the development of Russian formalism. Dmitriev said that, I quote, "The artist is now simply a constructor and technician, a leader and foreman." So if you look at these words carefully, even they signify one thing: some of the critics hid themselves behind the revolution. Like I said, the reason why Russian formalism exists is because at that particular time people were concerned with materialistic realities and so many things, including the relationship of class and production houses. So in this way, studying literature becomes mechanical, because you're only concerned with class differences and stuff like that. So this is why the Russian formalists wanted to move forward with an approach in which you actually appreciate art for what it is, instead of just looking into its materialistic realities and social aspects. And moving on to art as a device, Shilkowsky and Tomaszkowski actually say that the special use of language is quite important, and this is the bedrock of this particular theory. And phonic structures are also stressed on, as well as the rhythm, because they believe that poetry is controlled violence, and this is why it actually has this impact on the readers or the listeners. And they also preach one very important thing, and a lot of Russian formalists actually agree on this, and that is defamiliarization. They believe that literature is supposed to be different than everyday language. It's supposed to carry artistic qualities. It must have this aesthetic sense that could actually appeal to the masses. It should not be something that is common. So this is something that a lot of Russian formalists agreed on. And then they talk about a bunch of other things, like plot and story. Well, talking about plot, they say that a plot is strictly literary, whereas a story is merely raw material awaiting the organizing hand of the writer. And Stern says that plotting itself is a literary object. Talking about Shilkowsky, he doesn't have an Aristotelian approach. Aristotelian plot happens to be quite ordered, but the plot that Shilkowsky is suggesting, that plot is supposed to be defamiliarized. It's not supposed to be a common everyday plot. It's supposed to be different, and this is the bedrock of Russian formalism. Of course, Aristotelian plot is more concerned with familiar truths of human life, and it also talks about a certain inevitability, like something is gonna happen and that something cannot be stopped. But that is not what concerns Shilkowsky. Is more concerned with the defamiliarization of plot. So in this particular way, he does not have a classic Aristotelian approach towards literature. And then Tomaszkowski talks about a unit of plot which is motif. And motif stands for a single action. And then he breaks down motifs into two parts. He talks about the bound motif and the free motif. A bound motif is extremely essential from the story point of view, and without a bound motif, a story cannot move forward. A story would be incomplete. And when we talk about free motifs are everywhere, and they are not really essential in terms of the development of the plot. And this is ironically something that happens to be more important for Russian formalists. Tomaszkowski says that it's the free motifs that are focus of art. And then he talks about motivation. Another important thing which Tomaszkowski talks about, and he says that there has to be this illusion of reality. Even though literature may not be as real as some might think, but we're still supposed to be creating this illusion of reality, and we need to stay on the ground when we're actually crafting something like that. If it's something that does not appeal to the senses, or if it does not prove to be real, and if it does not carry a certain illusion to it, well, people would not take much interest in it. For example, if you come across a character that is behaving in a very uncharacteristic way, you would point out in that particular moment that this is not what a man in love actually does. So as a voracious reader, as someone who consumes a lot of content, whether that's literary or that is something that's related to media, well, you develop certain expectations. So even if it may not be that real, and even if you know that it's not real when you're actually reading a literary piece, still you would have certain expectations that it's more close to reality. So this is what Tomaszkowski talks about. And then we move on to Jacobson, and he preaches the same thing. He says that you need to defamiliarize literature, and without defamiliarization, the work would not carry much value, and it's important that we stick to that particular thing. He also talks about a very important thing that we need to understand. He talks about this, the term is the dominant. The dominant is something that acts like a catalyst and that inspires for a certain event to happen. So he says that there have been different reasons for different things. He's given certain examples as well. He says that the dominant of Renaissance poetry was derived from the visual arts. Romantic poetry oriented itself towards music, and realism dominant is verbal art. So there have been different inspirations for different things, but there are certain elements in the system that remain the same and they don't change. That is syntax, rhythm, plot and diction. They always remain the same. Moving on to the Bakhtian school, it's more in line with Marxism, and it believes that, I quote, language could not be separated from ideology. So over here the Bakhtian school is actually preaching that more or less a certain literary piece would be affected by the ideology of a certain society, and this is something you cannot escape. It's essentially a part of people's sensibility. People would craft something keeping that particular point of view in mind, and even if you're evaluating literature, you would keep that aspect in mind. It's not something that you could avoid. And again I would quote Selden: language, a socially constructed science system, is itself a material reality. So if language itself happens to be material reality, how could you divorce something like ideology from it? And ideology is is something that is shared by the society. It's the commonly held beliefs in a society that cannot change, and it contains material reality, political reality, religious reality and stuff like that. So this is something that is there in a society, and Althusser says that it's the state that actually imposes this particular ideology. All right, and this is what superstructure actually is. Superstructure is something that relies on the base, and base is the socio-economic relationship, and the superstructure is a building that is placed on that particular base. So superstructures happen to be the socially held beliefs, and in other words, it happens to be the ideology that actually controls things. So Bakhtian school says that no matter how hard you try to look at things from an aesthetic point of view, there are some things which you cannot escape, and that is the material reality of language. And he also Bakhtian school also adds that it's the context that defines meaning. And Makrowski talks about the aesthetic function of art, and he says that, and if you want to understand new criticism, do find the video, which is of course on my YouTube page. And if you want more on Russian formalism, just let me know. And the next theory would be the reader response theory, or the reader oriented criticism. So if you like the video, please subscribe and share. Thank you.